many of you posted something on your Instagram or Snapchat story that you cooked or baked during quarantine within the past few months? I'm guessing at least half or maybe even most of you have. During quarantine, most college students' Instagram and Snapchat feeds were flooded with pictures of homemade meals and especially bread over the past few months. I usually try to stick to a vegan diet, so it's a little bit harder for me to cook, but I wanted to modify some of my favorite recipes to make them vegan while I was home during quarantine. Today I'm going to share one of my favorite recipes with you guys, and I'm going to show you how to make it a non-vegan version, which is the traditional version, and also how to do some vegan substitutions, so if you do have a restricted diet, you can also enjoy the bread. Before quarantine, I hardly ever cooked or baked, so from one novice to another, this recipe is really easy, and the substitutions that I'm going to make are pretty simple. It's called Janet's Rich Banana Bread, and I found it on allrecipes.com about a year ago. It has 5 stars out of 9,515 reviews, so it's pretty good as far as online recipes go, especially for allrecipes.com. It also looks delicious, so if you're into Instagramming or Snapchatting your food, this is a great recipe for you. Today I'm going to walk you through the setup of the recipe and how to make your vegan substitutions, how to mix your ingredients, and how to bake and enjoy your food. Before you start, you should make sure you have enough time to set up all your ingredients, mix everything together, and bake and enjoy your bread. It usually takes me about an hour and a half to 2 hours to do everything, which is a significant chunk of your day, but I would say it's worth it. Also, cooking at home has significant not only physical but also mental health benefits. In a recent 2017 article by Dr. David Eisenberg from the Department of Nutrition at Harvard Health, he wrote that not only does cooking at home make people a more savvy grocery shopper when they go to the grocery store and try to buy vegan substitutions, but it also improves creativity, makes people more easily relaxed, and also improves general mental health. So cooking at home is a great way to release some steam and make something that's really fun. It usually takes me about 15 to 25 minutes to get all of my ingredients together, measure everything out, mix everything, and it takes about 1 hour for the bread to cook. For your ingredients, you'll need 1/2 cup of vegan butter, 1 cup of white sugar, 2 large eggs, or if you're looking to make your recipe vegan, I would use 1 tablespoon of flaxseed and 3 tablespoons of water per egg, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1/2 teaspoon of salt. The recipe calls for sour cream, but since I'm doing vegan substitutions, I'm going to do 1/2 cup of almond milk and a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. This is optional, but I like to do 1/2 cup of chopped walnuts and 2 medium bananas sliced. Obviously, these bananas aren't the most aesthetically pleasing, but I like to use extra ripe ones. Your first step is to preheat your oven to 350 degrees. Next, you'll want to grease your pan so your bread doesn't stick to the bottom or sides. This is a step I usually forget, but is super important in the cleaning process, so your bread doesn't turn out like this. To start your mixing process, you'll want to measure out 1/2 cup of vegan butter and 1 cup of white sugar and put the two in a large bowl. Then you'll need to add your 2 large eggs, or 1 tablespoon of flaxseed and 3 tablespoons of water per each egg. Now you'll also add your 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Now you'll want to add 1.5 cups of all-purpose or buckwheat flour, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt into the bowl. Next, you'll want to add your 1/2 cup of sour cream, or if you're using a vegan substitution, 1/2 cup of almond milk and a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar. Here, you'll also want to add your 1/2 cup of chopped walnuts and 2 medium ripe bananas. Stir this mixture until it's completely smooth. Finally, you'll want to put your mixture into your pan and make sure your oven is completely heated to 350 degrees. I like to add a layer of walnuts on top of my bread before I put them in the oven, just for the aesthetic factor. Now you'll want to put your bread in the oven and set your timer for 1 hour. In an hour, you'll want to check on your bread by sticking a knife through the center. If it comes away gooey like this did, it's probably not done yet. Once your bread is done and your knife comes away clean, you'll want to take your bread out of the oven with oven mitts and place it on a drying rack to cool for about 20 minutes. The recipe says this loaf has about 11 servings, which I think is pretty exact. A friend of mine and I shared this recipe, and we each had about 2 slices with about 6 pieces left over. A recent study by College Pulse says that about 14% of all college students stick to a vegan diet regularly. Making these substitutions is a super easy process and fun to enjoy with friends. I personally love to eat this recipe with a glass of almond milk. This recipe is a great dessert food, and it's fairly easy to make if you have about 2 hours to get all your ingredients together, set aside time to mix them, and then eventually bake it and eat it. Even if you're a novice at baking or just want to try out some vegan substitutions for the recipe that you already have, I definitely recommend this recipe. It looks really good and it tastes really good too. Question 1. What are other substitutions you can make to the non-vegan ingredients of this recipe? So substituting in vegan ingredients for a non-vegan recipe can traditionally be kind of hard, but I'm going to walk you through some other easier substitutions that you probably have laying around the house that you could use to make this recipe vegan. So butter is a little hard to substitute, and I did use a vegan butter, but I think if I was to do this without a vegan butter, I would probably use coconut milk and a little bit of almond milk. Probably just to replicate the same consistency, or you could use a non-dairy whip or non-dairy margarine. As far as the eggs go, I would just use applesauce or maybe even a little bit more bananas to replicate that same egg consistency. And you could also use silken tofu if you have that laying around. The sour cream can also get a little bit tricky, but I would recommend using a mixture of coconut milk, traditional vinegar, and apple cider vinegar to replicate that sour cream mixture, because that's really what gives this recipe the spongy texture and moist texture that you really want and what makes this recipe so special. Question 2. Can you cut this recipe in half? Yes, you can cut this recipe in half. I would just be super careful if you're using your vegan substitutions, because it can get a little confusing if you're mixing like certain tablespoons of flaxseed with certain tablespoons of water, and I feel like that's a mistake that I often make. Also, if you're going to use half the recipe, which I don't recommend because it is kind of time consuming, and I would just recommend using the whole thing and then having it for a long time and saving it, I would use a smaller pan. So the pan that I used in my presentation was a little large, but I would probably use a 9x5" loaf pan definitely if I were to cut the recipe in half. Even then that might be a little big, but it'll definitely be better, and it'll give you a thicker texture, and it'll just keep that like spongy effect that really makes this specific banana bread so tasty.